Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Pastor Shirley Johnson. I want to welcome you on behalf of Pastor Mitch Summerfield and Lady Chantel Summerfield to Word of God Fellowship for our Love is a Special Need event. We are so excited to have you all here today. Just some housekeeping tips for you. If you exit the sanctuary and head to the left, you'll have the women's restroom. If you go around to the right, you'll find the men's restroom. Feel free to come up close, get in personal with our panelists. We have a great program prepared for you today, and we have some amazing panelists who are going to bring a lot of knowledge and understanding to some things that can sometimes be a little bit confusing to navigate on your own. So we have some specialists who are going to share from their hearts, from their own personal experiences, to just really add to the conversation. We also have some dynamic faith leaders here who are going to talk about the church's response to autism and special needs. So without further ado, I'm going to ask for our panelists to come up. We have Senior Pastor Mitchell Summerfield. If you can come on up. All right, and then we also have Pastor DeLon Fletcher with us today. And as our panelists get situated here, we also have Mrs. Kalia Fletcher, who will be joining us today as well. All right, and now we have Dr. Jamie Pearson. Dr. Jamie Pearson, if you can come up and join us today. And we have a dynamic duo for our moderators today. That's Mr. Quam and Nakia Stringfield. They are special needs parents, authors, and just advocates in this community. So I am going to now turn it over to our moderators, and they'll take us through.
So good morning. We can be seated. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this morning. Welcome to the inaugural Faith and Autism and Faith panel discussion. What we are desiring to do with this is start a set of conversations on the subject of special needs, primarily based on the experiences that my wife have had and I have had in operating with children in this area, as well as peers and others who have joined us today. It's a conversation that we're having specifically in the church, in a church setting, because that is for the Black community, has been a pillar in how we cope, in how we manage, in how we ultimately live out our lives, very much with things being tied in faith. Our theme today, which may be striking to some folks, is love is a special need. And I'll let that marinate. Love in and of itself is something that we all specifically need. It's something that's specifically, especially needed in this space. But our definition of love today is an acronym, which comes from a book that my wife wrote that navigates and tells our journey, and she'll give a little more on that in a moment. But love stands for, the L is for level up, meaning rise to the challenge, rise to the occasion, whatever may be presenting itself to you. And as you rise to that occasion, we need to do things in order. We need to get information. We need to educate ourselves so that we can make sure we're hitting and targeting the right things that will actually help us make progress. And then today, we're going to express a certain level of vulnerability in the conversation, in that the Black community, as you'll find, based on the research that Dr. Jamie has done, based on the experience of these pastors, as well as Kalia Fletcher in the education system, there's a certain level of vulnerability that we all experience. And we want to talk about that vulnerability from the perspective of empathy, which is the E that goes into that. How can we, whether you have a special needs child or whether you are seeing that, being expressed in the community, how can you put yourself in that shoes, into those person's shoes? How can you relate as a Christian or or just as a peer, as a partner, as a friend, as a family member? So that's our theme today. We want to express love around the subject. It's Autism Awareness Month. And we also want to operate under that premise today. Now, our subject today is autism and faith specifically, and how those things tie together. So I'd like for my wife to kind of take things from here and tell you a little bit about our journey of how we got here. And then we're going to get into the questions that we have for the panel as well. Just want to thank you all for joining us today and looking forward to this conversation.
Hello, everyone. I am Nakia Stringfield, happy and excited to be here because this was something that I wish I had when we started on our journey. We've been on our journey for a period of time, but there was a significant amount of time that we were on this journey, we had no clue about autism. And when my daughter was 4, I had an experience where we were having, some challenging behaviors. We were getting calls every day from the school and the preschool. And it came to a point where I said, God, I don't have the answers. My friends don't have the answers. My pastors don't have the answers. Help me figure out what to do. Help me understand what steps I need to take. I'm feeling like a failure here. And shortly thereafter, I had an experience where one of my daughters wanted to go learn how to take dance, and we had promised her that we'll take her to a dance studio. They had a trial class. I took my 2 youngest daughters. They let both of them try out the class. While they were in the class trying it out, I was in the waiting room. And there was one other black mom in the waiting room. She had a little daughter. Her daughter was acting like my daughter. She was talking loud. She was bumping into the chairs, bumping into me, rolling on the floor. And I was just staring because I was like, what? That girl looks like my little girl. And I guess I was staring so much, and the mom said, well, she has sensory processing disorder. I'm so sorry she's bumping into you, but she doesn't know where her body parts are, and we're learning, we're in therapy. And I just sat there stunned, and I bravely asked her, I said, how did you find out? What is that? And she told me. And that was an answer to a prayer. That was the start of our journey. It was another 4 years before we got a diagnosis of autism, along with the sensory processing disorder. But faith has been a part of our journey. God met me there. And it was all about having the tools to know how to help my daughter's strength shine. And you're going to hear about that. So I just want to make sure I'm sharing that story so you know my journey and you understand that you don't have to be hopeless, you don't have to be with shame, you don't have to be frustrated, that these children, these adults with autism, they have gifts, they have strengths, and a great life is possible. So with that, I'm going to ask Dr. Jamie to share more about what is autism.
Thank you so much, Nakia. It's really a pleasure to be here this morning. So autism is a neurodevelopmental condition. It's often diagnosed in young children. However, we know that among children of color, we often see diagnosis a little bit later in life. Autism often impacts children and adults' communication, their social communication, so how they engage with others. It can also impact their behavior. Many people with autism have what we say are restricted or specific areas of interest in behavior, and it really is a lifelong condition, right? So when we think about young children, middle-aged students, even younger and older adults, right? Many folks experience the needs related to autism across their lifespan. The most recent reports in terms of prevalence from the CDC was just released about 2 weeks ago. It is now 1 in 33 children. So 1 in 33 8-year-old children are diagnosed with autism in the United States. I like to point out the difference in terms of prevalence. So that's the prevalence. It's a time at which we capture diagnoses. That's a little bit different from incidence, right? So we see prevalence at a particular time point, but incidence is how many times we see new cases of autism, and those numbers are a little bit different. So I always take those new numbers from the CDC with a little bit of a grain of salt, but the biggest pieces that we really highlight in terms of that identification are around social communication, specific patterns of behavior, and sometimes interfering behaviors.
So Dr. Jamie, thank you for outlining that. One of the things that was pivotal for us in the space of what is autism. I think for us, and specifically in the Black community, it's more so about sometimes what it's not, and some of the stigmas that may be associated with that. In our journey, as my wife explained, I work in a corporate type situation. I deal with healthcare in the IT space specifically, dealing with vulnerable citizens specifically. So this is kind of near and dear to my heart. And one of the things that is has been a principle for us is you don't know what you don't know. And that was our journey didn't begin with, okay, we just knew what autism was. We spent time running from what it wasn't because of what we had heard and how the stigmas go in terms of just thinking about what it is. But honestly, you don't know what you don't know. And until you get that information that goes with it, it literally will set you on a trajectory towards answers, towards support, and towards help. I won't use any of the terms that go along with some of those stigmas, because I think we know what they are, and they're the fears that haunt people. But the message we want to send is, Dr. Jamie just explained, it's what it is, and there are resources and other things available that we'll talk about in this space. So kind of as a segue here, I guess one additional thing we may go is, what may autism look like just in the everyday family life, as well as, the different ways it can present itself in society, and, whether in the home, whether in the school or otherwise. And I'd like to make that available to our panelists. I'll begin with Ms. Kalia Fletcher.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here with you all today. One of the ways that I often see autism present itself, particularly in the school system, children will need that extra support, as you started to talk about sensory, sensory needs. Our classrooms are typically structured in a very routine and consistent way, which we're used to, but there are needs within our classrooms that our children have, such as needing the visual support, needing tactile support. They might need to have an opportunity to stand up and move around a little bit. And being aware of our children's needs is the first way to bring them to success, if that makes sense. So that's what I see in the school in a nutshell, if that makes sense.
And also on the panel, we have Pastor Delon Fletcher, who's had some experience in the school system as well. Sir, how have you seen this in your area?
For me, with my approach, I've seen it in similar ways, but mostly it's the connectivity, I would say, with the tactile support, the need to be connected and to have somebody tangibly alongside supporting the individual. So I would spend a lot of time helping other students to understand, why is there another student having another individual escort this particular student? Why is he the constant guiding, the constant need to affirm, to validate, to give the reassurance, and to give direction to students to say, well, the reason is because there is a sensory fixation that says, I need this touch, and it's this touch that gives me the stimulation to get to whatever my next step, my next mission, my next objective is. And so that's very big in the spaces that I'm in. And then if we were to take it a step further, well, I think I see some of the, I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I see some of the other things, but I'm waiting because I'm getting a little excited. But yeah.
All right, excellent. Well, I appreciate that share. So I want to bring it home. So Miss Stringfield, and then I'd like to get a read from Dr. Jamie as well. So in terms of home life, how things may be different, some of the challenges as well as the rewards in some instances, but how does it look like from a home perspective?
Well, from a home perspective, one of the things that stands out to me is that we had a lot of challenges around clothing and the materials of clothing and making sure that there was loose fit. And sometimes when we were trying to go places, it would take hours, seriously, to get out of the house because one of our daughters didn't want to wear socks or the material was scratchy. My panties are bothering me, my socks are bothering me. There was times where we needed to make sure that we had certain order and structure in the house. So before bedtime, the shoes had to be lined up or can't go to bed because the shoes aren't lined up. So it showed up in those little ways that may seem like, girl, just go on to bed, But no, but these were real things that we needed to navigate. And so then we learn. So we were doing a lot of accommodations before we had a diagnosis, to be honest. And so that's why I want to share some of those real examples because you may not know. And just keep your heart and eyes open if there are anyone here that may be dealing with challenging behaviors. And Dr. Jamie.
That was a great segue, Nakia, because one of the things that shows up for us with FACES and a lot of the families I support are the challenging behaviors, or what we might also call interfering behaviors. When I'm training teachers, I always say, for whom is the behavior challenging, right? And a lot of times when we think about autistic children or children with autism, the behaviors that we consider challenging behaviors are challenging for us. Right? They are self-regulation strategies that the children are using to support themselves, and they can sometimes be challenging for the adults or other people around them. But from a family perspective, I would say that many families struggle sometimes with those interfering behaviors. And so one of the things that we try to do is help families understand that all behavior is communication, right? So no matter what type of behavior a child is engaging in, they're trying to communicate something to us. And so that is sometimes requires a bit of a learning curve for families, right? When we think about our different discipline practices and how we were raised and how our culture shapes understanding behavior and how we address behavior in the home, in a Black home, in a Black Christian home, right? Those are impacted. And so I think that is a big space in terms of how families experience autism and how they process that.
And I just want to add, Dr. Jamie and her team at NC State, the FACES program was a tremendous help for us when we first got that diagnosis. And so I went through her program. I think it was a 8-week program? 6-week program. So it really gave me a community of individuals that look like me to navigate. So I just want to put a plug in for your program and the research that you've done.
Thank you both for that share. So we've given some insight into what autism is and how it can present itself, some of the challenges in some instances. Again, there's rewards in that these individuals are uniquely gifted, and some of that we may be able to address here as well. But I'd like to shift just slightly to, so recent research that my wife pulled out discovered autism as a diagnosis, and Dr. Jamie alluded to this, it's becoming more prevalent in terms of diagnosis, meaning that the method and the awareness for the diagnosis is more prevalent in our community now. We're showing up because they're beginning to understand that it looks different than it did in what the typical method of diagnosing it was based on. The profile, I believe, was on 8-year-old white males as the primary subject that a lot of the research was focused on. And now, it they're finding that it looks different. And so with the numbers increasing, there's an increased need in the Black community of awareness, which is why we're here having this conversation around awareness. So in terms of your experience, gentlemen, as pastors in the Black community, your experience, what has been your engagement experience? Again, we don't know what we don't know. So in terms of potentially, membership coming, with questions, or people just generally wanting to share their experience, their journey, they may be seeking prayer, they may be seeking understanding, they may not be at a point where they just can reconcile things in their minds. I'd like to, again, we don't know what we don't know, and Pastor Mitch, you're welcome to share, your experience in this area here.
First of all, thank you for having me to be a part of this conversation. I think it's extremely important to have this information, especially come across the pulpit. It's important that our congregations know, our community know that they can get the assistance that they need and the information that they need. So really, really, really appreciate you guys for putting this together, arranging this conversation. I remember when my father was alive, there was some members that were here, have been here a good while, and I remember them getting into a conversation with this particular member, and they were explaining to my parents why they weren't able to be consistent at church. And the reason why was because they had two twin children who they were trying to figure out what was wrong with them, and I believe they had found out at that time that their two children were autistic. And it's very difficult for them to sit in church. They couldn't go to children's church. It was just extremely hard to be in the environment with all of the not regular, but you know what I mean? It was really difficult to be in a regular environment, not knowing how to, or the teachers not knowing how to accommodate and work with the children. And I remember that conversation like it was yesterday, although I was really, really young at the time, but I remember it as I started thinking about this conversation today, it all came back to me. And my parents, they had their own challenges with at the time it was 3 of us, and later on in life we had a younger brother, but at the time it was 3 of us and they had their own challenges. I'm dyslexic, so they had their own challenges with me, my own challenges with my sister, my older brother. He was extremely different as well. Not sure if there was a diagnosis there because we just didn't find out. But it's like you can have sympathy for someone, but until it hits you, your house, your children, something connected to you, you really don't know. And you really don't know how it truly feels. And I think as pastors and leaders, community leaders, it's important for us to not only have sympathy and pray for people, but to also provide the tools. I want to commend you, if I can, first of all, for not giving up on wanting to know, what is it? It's got to be something. It can't just be a demon. And I think over the years, and I mean, we know, I mean, just coming out of the church world and the apostolic faith and the Pentecost and the Holy, all of those things, which I'm not saying anything negative about it, but I'm saying that the things that we have heard over the years put us in a position where we won't go find out. I'll just go pray about it, or I'll just struggle with it, and those struggles can bring even more shame. And because you're trying to figure out if it's something wrong with you, if it's something, did you do this? Is this something that I could have prevented? Did I not eat right when I was pregnant? All of the myriad of conversations that you have with yourself, and you actually took the time to not only pray, not only talk with your husband about it, but you actually did the work to try to figure out what was it. And once you got the diagnosis, you get a prognosis, and then you stick with the prognosis, because it does not do any good to find out what's wrong and then stop in the middle. You have to keep going. So I think the journey never stops. The journey continues all through life. In this information, we were just looking at all the successful people that have been autistic their entire life, but they found out early, had the information, and now they're successful. And I think that's in Elon Musk is one of the people, okay? And I think that speaks volumes for knowing what you're dealing with. But I also believe the art of not knowing sometimes will put you in a position where you either decide, I'm gonna find out, or I'm just gonna put up with it. And I think you have exemplified, and many other families probably as well, but I'm saying while you're sitting here, I want to say thank you for not giving up and trying to figure out what it is so you can be a voice to those. Our youth pastor is sitting on the front row right now, it speaks volumes, because I believe that our churches have to be strengthened and know, as we are compelled to go to the hedges and highway and to reach everyone, that means in that group of everyone, 1 out of 33. So for every 33 people, children that come to our children's ministry, there's going to be one. If we're trying to, reach our whole region and reach our whole community, we have to be prepared for who's going to come. And so this information is helpful. Sorry if I went too long. Sorry.
No, you did fine, sir. And you made a very key point that spawned something in my thoughts around this. And Nakia, you're welcome to share as well. But again, the message is you don't know what you don't know. And that was, my background, my wife and I's background, NC State grads, engineering, very much problem solving, focused and oriented. But, with all that education, with all that experience and faith or otherwise, we were ignorant in this area. And when you begin to talk about outcomes for children and outcomes for them because they will become an adult, it's important to educate yourself, as to not just we keep reemphasizing this, because sometimes fear will drive you to just want to leave things alone, and there are interventions. We have vendors here today who offer support services. As Dr. Jamie said, this is an area of communication in some instances. As you were saying, about a normal or typical space, some of the terms that are used, the language is neurodiversity. I never viewed my children as being sick, all right? There was nothing wrong with them. They were wired differently. And that's where there are terms neurotypical, neurodiverse, which, there's controversy around now, just being politically correct. So many things you have to be politically correct about. When I got comfortable with neurodiversity, then I'm told I can't use the term neurotypical. And so, there's a lot of information, but at the end of this conversation, it is they think differently. Resistance to change sometimes, even when you think about adults, change in and of itself is one thing, but if you deal with internal anxiety associated with change, and that's just your nature as a person, how you're wired, then it's going to look different than someone who knows how to enter a room. Like right now, we're sitting in this room, there's white space, I hear it, you all can hear it. In some instances, you can filter it. Well, if you're wired in such a way that you can't necessarily filter that out, And then we're having a conversation. So now, and then the lights are flickering. And so if all of that input is coming in and you don't necessarily know how to deal with that as an individual, as a person, and you don't have the tools to know how to have a conversation in a social setting and how to order your food because you're so scared you're going to make a mistake, or you just don't know how the waiter, all the things that we as neurotypical in some instances, individuals, the things we take for granted are things that kids who are in this space, adults who are in this space, not just children, may just need a little coaching on, a little therapy. You know, I don't want to use the word treatment, but, you know, there are therapies available. There are resources. Again, social skills training. There's, what's the other type of training we used to get? There's occupational
therapy.
I'm talking too much. Go ahead. Help me.
So my husband's spot on. And a big aha moment was realizing there's nothing wrong with my daughter. There's nothing wrong with me. And I need to rewire my mindset. And that's where my book came from, Rewire Parenting. And so, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So I had to rewire my mindset, and rewiring my mindset was understanding new tools, new terminology, social skills training. What is that? And informally, I call that Mr. Rogers training. And we have a vendor here, Building Connections. A shout out to Christine Burkhart. Thank you for all of your support. She is now a member of our family, a permanent member of our family, for all of the support she's provided our children. But social skills training was very, very much necessary to understand, social cues. You don't stand this close to someone. You stand back. How to read a room. So many tools. And she also helped me understand how to talk to my child and how to help coach my child. And so, but those are terminologies I had no clue. None of my friends were talking this way. None of the individuals I was working with were talking this way. But what I will say this, as I wrote the book and I started sharing our story, more people were coming out. And they're hiding and they're isolated. So my message is, for those of you that may have felt isolated, there is a community for you. There is power in sharing your story. There's power in sharing your voice. And we're here for you.
Thank you for sharing there as well. And Pastor DeLon, I want to come to you with this question. So as Pastor Mitch said, it's not a demon that you're dealing with. It's an individual, it's a person who has some needs that may not look as typical as other needs, but they're special, that we can address, that we can support, that we can express love towards, leveling up, establishing order, being vulnerable in the spirit of empathy. So as we look at the Black community and specifically the church, what's been your experience, or I should say, what is the role of faith in supporting these special needs areas and the autism area, based on your wealth of experience across multiple sectors, sir?
I think for me, I would say the role is to honestly be open. More often than less, what I've seen is I've seen a lot of spaces where we tend to keep special needs in the box and we tend to religify it. And oh my God, well, baby, God's gonna do it. Just hold on. Baby, just hold on. Keep on believing. In time, in time, in time. We're learning that ASD is something that people will live with for a lifetime. So you're telling me in time, in time, in time, I'm a lifelong member of this congregation. My in time's not gonna end. And that's not to say that God can't do it, but there is also nothing wrong with my child. I might be born Mac and my child might be born PC, but you can both get online to Google and go into the bank and see what's in the account. through www.ncsq.com, right? Right. So the difference is we have to learn how to be compatible with the different operating systems. And so I'm feeling my own angst in my own body of faith. Y'all ain't talking to me today, talking about some end time, God can do it, but I'm really understanding, I'm receiving something negative. Because what am I looking for God to do if this is the way that my gift has been given to me? I have to change my mindset. I'm looking at it the wrong way. I'm believing the indicators from society, and not even society, I'm believing the indicators from how the black church might have just been taught. It's just a little bit of reality. And so we have to understand that as the church, we have to be able to encourage our parishioners and say, okay, this is what we're dealing with. And 99% of the times, it's because the church is not informed about anything outside of the four walls of the church.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And we've got to be aware about health. We've got to be aware about mental health, importantly. We've got to be alert about the financial resources. We just have to know what is really plaguing and impacting the parishioners who we are serving, who God has put us as custodians over in this season. And if we're not sensitive to their needs in totality, outside of just when they come in on Sundays and for Bible school, then we as shepherds are missing the mark. So we have to become, as faith-based leaders, more available, more in tune, and more connected, because our parents want an answer. And so as leaders, we have to encourage them. Well, here's what you do. You need to plug in with the Stringfields over at Word of God, because what they're doing, they got this dynamic book, Rewired Parent. They're already plugged into a network of resources because we're still learning. And many folks who don't have those resources, sometimes there are different barriers that are in their way that prevent them from being able to share where to go. And if they don't know what they don't know, sometimes the worst thing that you can do is not say anything because you don't know. Just admit that you don't know and say, well, maybe I could help you find a situation. Maybe I can reach out to somebody. But sometimes in different faith-based communities and different faith-based pockets, we could be so reclusive and so afraid to partner that we can't tackle a problem that's cannibalizing us as a whole. And where there is no unity, that's how the enemy really seeps in and devours. And so collectively, we have to be open to the resources that are out there. And everything is not always a spiritual battle as we tend to make it seem. But yes, God will support us on that journey, and we need that strength. We need godly wisdom. We need godly insight. But we also need the resources that our Heavenly Father placed among us in therapeutic solutions, in doctors, in medicine. We need what God has put out there because He put them there for a reason. And we have to be open to those solutions in order to help solve what we're dealing with, in order to help learn how to better support and be more versed in that community.
Thank you, sir, for sharing. And we're doing fine on time. You said so much, and I want to turn twofold. I want to ask Dr. Jamie, because she's done research in this area specifically, and has published white papers and otherwise around the connection of faith and autism specifically. And you're welcome to share a little more about the FACES program as a part of this. It's been a powerful resource in making the connections, building the connections that we've had in this area. On this panel, the way this came about, my wife and I have a specific connection with each individual on this panel, just through life experiences and traversing the journey. And it's just amazing how it all came together, that we all had our unique perspective that we could add. But a part of that journey here because we're all kind of operating out of that faith community perspective. Based on what you've heard the pastors share, Dr. Jamie, and then as you relate that to what you saw in your research, can you share a little on that?
Absolutely. So I'll give just a little bit more context on FACES because I kind of talk about it a bit, and I'll address that, Kwam. So I run a parent empowerment and advocacy program called FACES at NC State, and it stands for Fostering Advocacy, Communication, Empowerment, and Support. I developed it in 2016 in Chicago, and so that was sort of our first set of graduates. And it brings together Black families and Black parents like Nakia and others, Nicole, to learn about what autism is, but especially to build community, right? We provide tools, we build connections with related service providers so that they know, what is occupational therapy, what is speech language therapy, how might it support my child? And so we built FACES having sort of those foundational components embedded, but one of the things that we learned over time is that faith and the impact of faith was reoccurring, right? So many of our participants were saying, well, Dr. Jamie, I feel like I can't go to my church anymore, right? Or how do I reconcile my faith and my belief in God with an understanding of the diversity of our humanity, right? How can I reconcile that? And so it led us to dig more deeply into how families were making meaning of disability, and a lot of that was guided by their faith or their struggles, right? That they maybe I don't believe in God anymore if my child isn't healed, right? Or this expectation that my child's autism will go away. And so we've really seen a number of families struggling with that, but we've also seen them struggle with just being in an inclusive place of worship, right? Where they aren't able to sit through service, where they may not be able to be supported in children's church, for example. And so ultimately what we've learned is that we need a lot more professional development in places of worship to provide those supports for our worship leaders, for our children's church leaders, to know what is it to provide visual supports? How do we offer sensory breaks? How do we engage in social communication strategies? How do we understand that if a child is having a tantrum, they're trying to tell us something, right? So these are the things that we want to see embedded in churches, in our Bible school, Bible study, children's church, that will create a more inclusive space, and particularly in the Black church, right? FACES is specifically designed for Black families. And so I've been working with some of my friends who are also pastors across the country to think more about what this looks like and having that reconciliation between faith and neurodiversity.
Thank you for sharing as well. One of the other components of this, so we're talking about, how there are mechanisms, accommodations, and, methodology, strategies that we can use in the church, which has been wonderful. I'd like to shift and turn our conversation, just rewind it a little bit back to, as we look at the education community, because our children, they got to be educated, they got to go to school, there is a outcome. Scripture even says, about the thoughts that God has towards you of peace and some of the other things to give you an expectation of a great and powerful end. It's one of the things that's kept us grounded, my wife and I, in this conversation, and knowing that there is an outcome. And I love the analogy that Pastor Fletcher provided, in that you've got this iPhone, and then you've got those other people who use Androids, but at the end, I said iPhone and the Android people, but and there's a reason why you're Androids, but we won't get into that. So it's a different mechanism to get to the same outcome. You need to make a phone call, you want to send a text, okay? You want to browse a website or otherwise connect with an app. They both work. I was an Android guy for quite a while, but I'm glad I was delivered. So moving on, when we look at those mechanisms in the school system,
Google powers all of them. Google powers all of them. And I'm just saying,
as I was saying before, I was so rudely interrupted with non-pertinent information. We can Google that as well. So in the school system, again, my wife and I were ignorant So there's this thing called a 504. There's this thing called an IEP, and we knew that we were wrestling with getting calls from the school. I mean, there's so many different stories we could tell you of the things that I had to hear. At one point, my wife was just so emotionally overwhelmed that the school could not talk to her. They just knew, or I'd be working and the school would call and she'd come and say, here's the phone. It gets that real. It can get that intense. There are places that we've been told, don't bring that child back. I mean, I know this is being recorded, but we're just speaking transparently with you. Don't bring them back. And we had to face all of that with the knowledge that we had, always knowing that, well, I won't bring them back there, but I got other places I can take them. But I never would get an attitude with the place where we just didn't have success, because I knew that, okay, that just wasn't the right environment. Either they didn't understand or I didn't understand. It was a misunderstanding. And so that happens in the school systems sometime as well. And we are educated as a community to know what these types of plans are and what they mean and how they operate. And so, I did call you doctor. So I'm not prophesying. So I want to turn to Kalia and say, there is special education and specific mechanisms that are set in place for that, and services that come along with that. But then there are also the other means that may not mean a child has to specifically be in a special education class, but yet there are still services provided as a part of that too. Can you elaborate a little on how those two differ and how the supports work?
Absolutely. And before I do that, if I may, I always like to tell parents that I like to remind them that you are your child's first advocate. And our community in particular, our Black community, we historically put the school on a pedestal. And we come from a place of esteeming teachers, as they should be. Teachers earn their pennies. But, we esteem them and we kind of say, okay, you all are the experts. Here's my child. Take them and do what you will. And I try to remind parents, no, that's not the way it works. It's really a triangle. Education, your child's educational journey is a triangle that consists of your child, yourself, and the school. And so sometimes the school may not be, and I know this is recorded, the school may not be educated, the best educated, on how to handle children that are not cookie cutter kids. And so with that being said, push. When you know as a mother, as a father, as a grandmother, a caregiver, that something more is needed or something may not be right, that's when you seek out and you say, no, it's not just that Johnny just can't sit still. No, it's not just that, well, he's just not a talker. No, let's investigate further. Let's seek out faces. Let's seek out, at my church, we have the Stringfields, and maybe they can give me some guidance. And then you go in with unity, like Pastor DeLon talked about, as a team, and you approach the school. That is always okay, to bring an advocate with you to your meetings, to your appointments at the schools. So, with that being said, yes, there are different programs within special education for your family to access. And some programs look like a self-contained classroom, a classroom that's created to meet the specific or intense needs that your child may have in order to access the curriculum and succeed academically. And then there are programs where children don't need to be pulled out and separated. They need the least restrictive environment, which would be in their classroom, but with supports and accommodations, as we've started to talk about. And that could look like extra help or a person that goes with them into classrooms to access their curriculum. So there are options. And then I know we started to talk about 504, and 504 is different from an IEP. And then sometimes all of that sounds like French, right? It sounds like French. And that's where you say, I have a question. I need an answer. I feel like I went over, but I guess the biggest point in the special education piece in dealing with the schools is to know you are the most important member of that IEP team. I always say to parents when I'm in an IEP meeting, I say my spiel, I share my evaluation results, and then I'll turn to mom and say, okay, mom, now you are the expert in Johnny. So now please share with us, what do you see? What are your concerns that we might address them? So just remember, you are the most important player. Just remember that.
And if I could just piggyback in off of that, with you being the most important player, there are some scenarios and situations and even some language sometimes, as she was indicating, where it sounds completely different. It sounds like French. There are all these policies, there's ways they're clicking through these documents. It's like, click, click, did we do this? Is this verified? And I'll be honest, sometimes it's a bit overwhelming. When it gets to that space, one of the things that parents have to understand is you have the right to speak up and say, you know what, this is moving too fast. Can we just slow this down just a little bit? And sometimes we're uncomfortable making that statement. But it's imperative that we speak up in those moments because these are legally binding documents. They're federal documents. And when those documents are signed, sealed, and delivered, that's your child's fate from the education's perspective on the line. And so, as Quam illustrated, you don't know what you don't know, but we also don't want to give a system a blanket statement to put that stamp on what we also don't know. And if we need to have something explained, there's nothing wrong with just saying, I really didn't understand that. Can you break that down for me just a little bit more differently? Because that just went zoom right over my head. And as an advocate, there are times that I sit in certain sessions and I know that some of my parents, they're not getting it, but they also don't want to look inferior in the process. They don't want to feel bad because they already feel a certain type of way because they feel that their child is making the institution bad because they're trying to adapt to what their child is experiencing and all they see is the behavior. And so we have to break that and allow our parents to get the strength to have the courage to speak up and say, no, I don't get that. So don't put yourself in that box. You got to stand up and you got to say, it's going over my head. Can you water that down just a bit so I can make sure that I'm understanding, I know what we're signing and what we're agreeing to for Johnny's IEP or for his plan?
Yeah, I want to, then I'll come straight to you. I want to tap Pastor Mitch, then I want to come to you. So there's a piece of this conversation that you both have shared that's enlightening, but there's a subtle point I want to make, and that is IEPs aren't just for kids who may be needing a little additional support to get to what would be the typical standard. It's a spectrum. There are also available for the gifts that exist sometimes for children in this space as well. You may be dealing with a child who's super gifted, and as a result of them being either bored, frustrated, or otherwise just not challenged to the degree that they need to be, it starts showing up and manifesting in ways that are seemingly detrimental. And you've dealt with that here. The church operates a Christian academy here, and we've had some experience in that space where you've had to make accommodations for gifted children. Sheriff, if you'd like to share.
Yes, I will definitely touch on that. We had to actually create a totally different, we had to bring in a resource teacher that was gifted in the area of helping students that were academically gifted. They needed more. I remember this one instance where this child wasn't reading well, but could remember anything that anybody says, like verbatimly remember it, and and can recite it. It could be 10 days, 2 weeks later, and they could just remember it like it was nothing, the whole conversation. And that resource teacher figured out that, wait a minute, this person is academically gifted, and did a couple of tests and kind of made sure that it was confirmed. And so we wanted to provide that for our students here at school, and this was definitely this was even before the pandemic. Yeah. And since the pandemic, of course, has changed it a little bit, but still offer the assistance for our students too.
Yeah, and I want my wife to share, because this is the part of the conversation where, when I say there are gifts that exist in these children that are untapped, I literally mean that. In that, while in one area they may be socially needing some additional support, in another area they may be extremely artistic, have phonographic memories. The list goes on of CEOs and others. We mentioned Elon Musk. There's a list of others that operate in this area that you would never know because of their ability they got the services, they got the support, and now they're able to operate the way an iPhone does versus how an Android does. I'd like for my wife to share, our experience in this area. She, the parent advocate was a big thing for us in school, the IEPs, but also in terms of the gifts that we see in this area.
Absolutely. So as Pastor Mitch was talking about his scenario, I'm going to actually share the story of one of our daughters who was later diagnosed as autistic. We didn't know that at first. In kindergarten, she was in class, and they were putting on a spring play, and she was excited because she had seen her older sister go through the process of a spring play. But she had issues sitting still. It was a little bit boring, being waiting for your turn to do the part. She had a part of the flower. And so, we knew about occupational therapy at the time. So we were giving her the exercises to do to keep herself occupied, like squeezing her muscles and counting those and all that stuff. But as a part of her self-regulation, she memorized everybody's part in the play, verbatim. She knew everybody's part in the play, and right before, and we were getting calls from the school where the teacher was like, she's not being still, and we don't know if we need to remove her from the play.
They were going to put her out of the play, y'all. I just wanted to cut to that part of it. They were going to kick her out. Go ahead.
And so we put our strategies in play, and we had a teacher. So this is the power of teacher. There was a teacher that was sensitive, that knew that my daughter had some superpowers. And the scarecrow, so this play had a scarecrow. The scarecrow, the main character of the play, got stage fright the day before the play. And this advocate teacher told the drama director, this child, she knows every part. She knows that part. So she ended up playing 3 parts of the play. And the teacher said it was one of the best plays and all that stuff. And listen to this, her self-esteem went up. She went from being a nuisance to the star. And so that has been part of our strategy overall, is look for the strengths. Look for the strengths. And so I just wanted to share that. And also, as a part of this process, you were mentioning about the IEPs. We had a challenge where my daughter was getting bored in a class. She was getting through the work. So we wrote it into the IEP to give her some extra math work, and we provided the math book. But it was a process for us to get there, because at first, you think about an IEP, you think about that's a label. So Dr. Pearson, I want you to talk about the label.
Sure. Yeah, I think, for many families broadly, they can often struggle with this idea of what is a disability or what does this label mean, right? And for Black families in particular, when they come through FACES or we meet them in the community, there's a lot of stigma and fear around my child being labeled. And one of the things that I do, in addition to reaffirming that they are their child's best and first advocate and most important player on the IEP team, is helping them understand that these fears are valid, right? We have a history of segregated schooling in the United States. We have a history of tracking, particularly for Black and brown children. We have a history of overrepresentation in special education, particularly in areas of intellectual disability and behavior disorders. And so those fears are valid, right? Because I remember what happened to my uncle or my cousin when they were labeled and tracked in the schooling years ago, right? And so that's one of the conversations that we have with our families, is affirming and validating those feelings, but also it's important to help families understand what comes with these related services, right? Sometimes having this label opens the doors to school-based supports. Oftentimes having that identification is the key to being able to get those supports in schools and sometimes in the community. And so again, we do what I call a lot of reconciling in FACES, where we help families understand this point, but also know that there are tools to support them.
So I was going to say that the latter of what she said about the labeling thing, the tools, the support. My wife and I, again, we're technologists in our background, and we focus primarily, if I had to summarize, on bringing together people, processes, and technology or systems. So, one part of our journey along that path has been obviously communication, connecting with people, establishing the networks for conversations. We've also, dealt with the processes, navigating the processes. I want to reemphasize that one of our biggest supports in the educational system was we went through our network of our small village we began to build of support. We found out this thing called a parent navigator. It's an individual who Kalia mentioned. I don't know all those IEP terms. I had to work. I was frustrated, busy, with the other things I needed to do. And they said, oh, well, you can pay this person. You can send them all your information, they'll analyze it, and then they'll come back with you with their assessment, and then they can attend the meeting with you with the school system to help you get things set up and in place. And I said, really? That's all? And literally we use that as a tool to help us set the frameworks to have the right language and to understand how to navigate those systems. One of the other things that we didn't discuss today that I just want to share before we kind of move towards final words is a part of those technologies, and it's one of the things that you wrestle with in the church and the faith community, a part of those technologies and systems. We had to have some long conversations even about medication. Medication is a technology in this space. A lot of times as soon as labels are thrown out, immediately folks will hear the term Ritalin, or that was the old term, or just throw that on them or fill them up with Benadryl. Just that's the real old school thing. Make them go to sleep. Give them some Benadryl. This is Black community, y'all. We're just talking, and so there's stigmas around medication. There's fear around taking the doctor medicine in the church. And so that's one of the things that, in terms of outcomes, you've got to navigate. And if you're a married couple, you got to, become aligned on even how you might use those therapies and support that are available. But don't just immediately just turn your head from just that therapy that's available, whether long-term or short-term, it's a support. It's so often we're destroyed just from lack of knowledge, but also rejecting it. So I would encourage you to at least be open to the conversation to hear that is the other point I wanted to make here. So I'd like to give everyone here the opportunity to chime in on some points as we were talking earlier that you may want to, some things we didn't emphasize, anything we may have missed in this conversation before we close out today. The mic is open.
One thing I'll just add that we haven't talked about a lot is the role of biases among healthcare providers and diagnosticians, right? We've talked a lot about the stigma that we have in the Black community and sometimes the lack of knowledge around autism and disabilities in general, but there's also a bias, right? Internal and external biases among folks who diagnose children with autism that play a role in that. And so that's some of the work that we've been doing in the field, but I think it's important for parents to know, right, and family members to acknowledge that even when you're doing your best advocacy, even when you are reaching out, even when you go to the pediatrician and say, I think my child's developing a little bit differently than my older child, that you don't have that fear, that stigma, and that shame, because oftentimes parents are told, come back in 6 months, right? And 6 months turns into another 6 months. And we have families who have been trying to get access for many years. So I think part of this conversation is acknowledging the efforts that many folks are already putting in, and our systems are not set to serve Black and brown families. And so there's a lot of work to be done on the systemic side to ensure that we have the access at first, right? And then those ongoing supports. So I just wanted to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, that's pivotal. Others? Thoughts?
Yes, I wanted to just capture before we left today that I was talking to Nakia at some point, I believe maybe a week ago, and she said a phrase that stuck with me, and I'd like to share it with you. There's hope and there's help. A lot of times, you know, depending upon the setting you're in, the hope will be pushed. Hope, 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 hope. And then you're like, but what do I do? And then there are other settings where your resources are thrown at you, and then you're just overwhelmed. But remember, they go hand in hand. There is hope and there is help. And I love that we've set up here rewiring not just the children, but as parents. We have to rewire the way we look at what's in front of us and what we're dealing with. And I love how you said strength, strength, strength. That's what we look at first. Strength-based focus. That's what's important, because that's what we all need regardless of what we're dealing with. We don't want to always hear, well, these are your weaknesses and this is what you can't do and this is your difficulty. No, strength, strength, strength. Strengths first. And then the last thing I wanted to say just on that advocacy piece, you know, you mentioned that there are services available where you can call someone up and you can give them your child's folder, say, look at this. They look through it. They get back to you. They have a long list of points to ponder and discuss with the team. And then you go to the meeting and they advocate for you and you work side by side. Guess what? What happens when you don't have that money to hire that person, right? A lot of the families I deal with need advocates. They don't have the money for advocates. So what I want you to know leaving here today is an advocate does not have to be a paid person. An advocate can be, Pastor Mitch, I know we had this conference at the church. I need somebody to go into the meeting. Would you consider going with me? It can be, Nakia, I know you work, I know you're busy. I'm nervous. We've got this meeting for Johnny. They speak French in there. Can you just come with me? You know, Kalia, can you come? Reach out and ask, okay? There are paid advocates, but there are people that you have the right to bring into your meeting, okay?
Sir.
Again, I would say on the same note, don't be afraid, don't be ashamed to simply just reach and get the help that you need and get the support that you need. The gifts that God has blessed you with within your children, they're just that. They are gifts and they are tailor-made just for you. He knew what he was doing before the foundation of time when he blessed you with that gift. So there is nothing wrong with that gift that you have. And so as you're traveling through society, through communities, as you're growing and watching them grow, when they need support, get them the support that they need. And don't be afraid to fight and advocate on their behalf. That's what the body of Christ is for. That's what the church is for, and what they're supposed to be doing, to be that pillar in that community, to be that beacon. And that's what we're here for. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. I applaud you, Pastor Mitch, for using this house to be a beacon for this moment. Stringfield, you guys are always on it, and I'm grateful for having the opportunity just to be able to be participating on today. Thank you.
I second all of that.
Thank you so much. And we'll close by saying, I'm not closing out yet. All right, I'll let you go, and then I'll go last.
Yes, I was getting ready to say. So much has been said today, and what I would say is that I want everyone listening to know that hope is possible, that there's a happy, winning life that is possible. I want you to see beyond any challenging behaviors, anything that's happening that seems impossible, and know that this journey you on is a interesting journey, but it's not a journey of doom. That's really what I want. I want you to keep hope, and I want you to keep faith. And that's why we said autism and faith. It's about education, but also knowing that faith is a source of strength in this journey. So I'll leave with those words.
And that was perfect perfect segue into what I wanted to say. So what you have on the stage today is strength on display. We're uniting here, beginning a conversation that we need you to continue. But we also want you to understand that there is strength on display in your homes. These children are gifted. We've got one of our daughters has brought her side hustle in with her this morning. She's been weaving all week. So she's got very artistic, very creative. We've seen these gifts manifest in our home. Some of the things that they've done for me as a father for birthdays that I just sat and I just pondered and said, how in the world did you think to put something like this together? Everything from dinners to where they dressed up like the ladies from Wakanda, and I was King T'Challa, to you name it, and very much artistic and gifted, and video. And so know that there are strengths in your children. They may be hidden, that the therapies and the other things and the confidence, once they get past the anxiety, so that they can begin to experience and express those strengths. And as my wife said, keep the faith in this conversation. It's very much a part of it. Keep the faith in terms of traversing the journey, and keep faith at the forefront of what you're doing as you're navigating this. Know that God is with you and supporting it, and know that you are strong in that, as Kalia said, as your child's primary and chief advocate. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Again, this first inaugural conversation here at Word of God Fellowship, sponsored by Winning Ways, the 501c3 for community outreach in this area. We want to just welcome you to both here to this church as well as to Life International there in Durham. Great things going on in both spaces. Encourage you to connect with Dr. Jamie and the FACES program. Send resources there. Folks who maybe you've noticed now based on this conversation that, hey, they may not understand it or know it. Make the connections. The vendors are here today, building connections. The Autism Society of North Carolina is here. The FACES program is here. We've also have one of our sisters in the church who's got some art on display back there. Again, very artistic in this area. And other vendors are here providing support and services. Again, building connections has been a big thing for us in terms of the social skills training. Really appreciate that. I want to thank you for joining this conversation, and enjoy the rest of your day, your weekend, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Did you have one thing?
One thing.
One last thing.
Something
Yes, sir.
that just hit me while you were talking. First thing I want to say, anybody that has a Android, there is nothing wrong with your phone. Okay? There's nothing wrong with your phone. Okay?
It's just wired differently.
It's just wired differently. If you have an Apple device, there is nothing wrong with your device.
It's actually gifted.
It's actually a forbidden fruit. It's actually the forbidden fruit, okay? So I want you to know that as you progress in your day. No, honestly, let me close. I just want to say this one thing. There's a scripture that I'm reminded of, since we did say this is, autism and faith. 1 Corinthians 13:13, okay? It says, faith, hope, and love abide. These things, for now, they abide. They are present. And then it goes along to say, but love is the greatest of them all. Okay? So I would say that the title for this conference was so pivotal for me, because love is the greatest of it all. And you have to find a way to love your children, to love every inch of them, every fiber of them, no matter whether they're being complicated, complex, difficult, learning, whatever it is, you have to love them. And the way you show love is exactly what you did. You had to find out what was going on so that you could learn how to love them without anger, without frustration. Because I grew up in a house where my parents would discipline us angry. And it would be an angry discipline, but they also didn't know why, so it's important that's really important. So love is what conquers all. Thank you for this.
Yeah, that's really, really heavy. I appreciate that. There's more that could be said about what you just said, because it opens up a whole nother area, but we're gonna close with part one of this conversation. So again, thank you all. Thank you to all the panelists who joined us today, bringing your various levels of expertise. Thank you to all the vendors who are here. We want everyone to just give them a round of applause. Yes, thank you. And so, having closed, we now want to move to the next part of